Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to being well-informed. We cut through the noise, pull out the key insights from, well, often a whole stack of sources. Today, we're diving into a really monumental piece of legislation, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, or OBBBA, as it's known. Now, this isn't just any bill. Imagine one single massive act trying to reshape some really fundamental parts of American policy. You know, everything from taxes and spending to borders and energy. Our deep dive today, it's built on congressional reports, lots of news analysis, and some deeper insights into the Republican Party's principles and where they are right now, our mission. To unpack this pretty complex legislation, understand its aims, its, myriad provisions, and what it tells us about policy direction and the Republican Party itself. Think of it as your quick guide to getting up to speed on a real legislative heavyweight. Okay, so let's get into it. After the 2024 elections, Republicans controlled both the House and Senate, and a major legislative push was immediately on the cards. This whole one big, beautiful bill idea, it came directly from President-elect Trump. He wanted one single comprehensive bill, mainly to deal with the expiring 2017 tax cuts.
Right, which was quite different from the initial thinking, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Senate Majority Leader John Thune, his first instinct was separate bills, tackle border security, energy, the military first, and then deal with taxes later.
So this unified approach, this single big bill.
Yeah.
It wasn't with fascism.
No, not at all. There was concern right from the start about, members defecting, not getting everyone on board within the party.
And what's really striking here, I think, is just the sheer scale, the ambition. I mean, this bill, the version that passed the Senate anyway, it's packed. Literally hundreds of provisions. The projections are, they're huge, slashing about $4.46 trillion in tax revenue over 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And at the same time, adding an estimated $3 trillion to the national debt. So that raises a pretty critical question, doesn't it? How does that fit? Cutting revenue so much and adding to the debt, how does that align with traditional Republican economic thinking?
That's the core tension, exactly. And I think to understand how they navigated that, we really need to look at what the bill means for your wallet. Because the economic side, especially the tax changes, they're a direct reflection of that Republican philosophy. So let's zoom in a bit on those key tax provisions. Okay, the flagship item, the big one, is making those individual tax rates permanent, the ones President Trump signed back in 2017. Just doing that is estimated to cost around $4 trillion over 10 years. It's massive.
$4 trillion just for that piece.
Right. And it's not just some technical adjustment. It's a major statement. It commits to that core Republican economic idea. Low income taxes, deregulation, something they've pushed since the 80s, really, often tied to supply-side economics.
Yeah, that's textbook.
Beyond that, though, there are some interesting, more targeted deductions. The SALT deduction caps state and local taxes. That gets increased quite a bit, up to $40,000 for folks making under $500K.
But only temporarily, right?
Right, reverts back after 5 years. And that specific deal, it was reportedly cut with Republicans from high-tax states. Think New York, California, New Jersey.
Yeah.
Shows how those regional interests play out.
Sure. Give and take.
Then you've got some new deductions aimed at specific groups. A new tax break for tips and overtime pay for workers under a certain income. And an auto loan interest deduction up to $10K a year, but only for cars assembled here in the U.S., bought between 2025 and 2028.
Interesting. Targeted incentives.
Yeah, and for seniors, a pretty big increase in their tax deduction. The Council of Economic Advisors estimated it would let 88% of seniors deduct enough to basically wipe out their Social Security tax burden.
That's a significant change.
It is. The child tax credit also gets a boost. The Senate version makes it $2,200 permanently. The House wanted a bit more, $2,500, but only until 2028.
Okay.
And to maybe help pay for some of this, there's a new 1% tax on remittances money sent out of the country, estimated to raise about $10 billion, and a new tax credit for metallurgical coal. Oh, and these Trump accounts. A new thing where parents can put in $1,000 when a child's born, then up to $5,000 a year after that. Grows tax deferred for things like college, job training, or a down payment on a house.
So if you connect all these dots,
Yeah.
what's the bigger picture emerging from these tax provisions?
Yeah.
Well, it clearly shows that a deep-seated Republican focus on broad tax cuts.
Yeah.
Trying to incentivize people to save, trying to stimulate the economy through the private sector. The party platform, it consistently backs low-income taxes, less regulation. The belief is that free markets, individual achievement, that's what drives prosperity.
Right.
So this is really a direct application of that core philosophy, even with that projected debt increase, which, like you said, was definitely a sticking point, even for some Republicans. We'll probably get to that.
Yeah, definitely. Because beyond taxes, this bill plows massive amounts of money into other areas. Border security jumps out. This feels like a really direct reflection of another core Republican principle, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's become central.
The bill puts aside an incredible $170 billion for border security. And the stated aim, is to build the capacity to deport up to 1 million people a year.
1 million. That's a huge number.
It really is. And look where the money's going. $46.5 billion for the border wall, $45 billion over 4 years just to add 100,000 new migrant detention beds. It's like a 365% increase in ICE's budget just for detention.
Wow.
Almost $30 billion for ICA to hire 10,000 new agents, plus transport and deportation costs. Another $17 billion to help state and local police with border stuff.
Okay.
Nearly $8 billion for 3,000 new Border Patrol agents and vehicles. Over $6 billion for border tech. $3.3 billion for more immigration judges and staff.
So wall, beds, agents, tech,
Yeah.
judges. It's comprehensive.
Very. And it also brings in new fees. $100 for asylum applications, $550 for work authorization for asylum seekers, $500 for temporary protected status, $250 for non-immigrant visas.
So this whole section, it undeniably lines up with the party's strong stance against illegal immigration. And, the push for much tougher border enforcement that's become even more emphasized, obviously, in the Trump era.
Right.
But it brings us back to that question you raised earlier. How does the party square these huge spending increases for the border with their stated goal of cutting federal spending overall?
That's such a critical point, because right alongside these huge investments, the bill proposes really significant spending cuts elsewhere.
Okay. Where are the cuts falling?
The OBBBA details over $1.2 trillion in federal spending cuts. And the main target, Medicaid.
Ah, Medicaid.
Yeah, big changes there. New work requirements for many recipients ages 19 to 64 needing to work 80 hours a month, with some exceptions, of course.
Yeah.
Cuts to something called the Medicaid provider tax, states being required to check if people are still eligible every 6 months instead of annually.
Mm-hmm. More frequent checks.
A 5-year waiting period before green card holders can apply for Medicaid, and a 1-year ban on Medicaid funding for Planned Parenthood or, hypothetically, similar groups.
So quite a few changes to Medicaid eligibility and funding.
Definitely. And similar things for SNP, the Food Assistance Program. New work requirements there, too, for ages 18-64, same 80 hours a month.
Mm-hmm.
And states have to pick up a bigger share of the admin costs, going from 50% to 75%.
Increasing the burden on states.
Seems like it. And student loans also get hit. Pausing a rule that could cancel loans if schools were, deceptive in recruiting. Capping unsubsidized loans for grad students. Adding a lifetime borrowing limit.
So these cuts, particularly hitting welfare programs like Medicaid and SNP, they really illustrate that Republican belief, don't they, that individuals should take more responsibility, that the private sector is just better, more effective than government programs.
A move towards smaller government, in theory.
Yeah. Exactly. A more limited federal government. Yeah. It's a long-standing party principle, even though, as you mentioned, some of these specific cuts faced real pushback and criticism during the whole legislative fight.
Right. Now, the bill also touches on energy policy, and that's been kind of a shifting area for Republicans, hasn't it? Especially lately. What's the approach here?
Yeah, energy's always complex.
Well, the OBBBA includes a pretty significant phase-out of those clean energy tax credits, the ones passed in the Inflation Reduction Act.
Ah, rolling back the IRA provisions?
Yeah, hitting things like wind and solar projects, electric vehicles, EV charging stations. It also pushes back fees on methane emissions for 10 years, but it extends tax credits for biofuels.
Interesting mix there. Delaying methane fees, helping biofuels.
And on top of that, it mandates the Bureau of Land Management to hold onshore oil and gas lease sales every quarter.
Okay, so that paints a pretty clear picture. Prioritizing traditional energy, oil and gas, and actively moving away from those clean energy incentives. It lines up perfectly with the current party focus. Deregulation, boost domestic fossil fuel production. But it definitely raises long-term questions, about climate targets and the whole energy transition idea, which then I suppose leads us to ask, what kind of hurdles did this monster bill actually face getting through Congress? especially from inside the party, and dealing with rules like the Byrd Rule.
Oh, the journey was definitely not smooth. We heard that phrase early on, averting a rebellion.
Right.
And the Senate's vote-a-rama on this, it was apparently historic, set a record for the most amendment votes ever.
Wow. Oh.
The huge obstacle was the Byrd Rule. Now, that rule applies to these reconciliation bills.
Which are used to fast-track budget stuff, right?
Yeah.
Simple majority in the Senate.
Exactly. Bypasses the filibuster. But the Byrd Rule says you can only include things directly related to the budget. No extraneous stuff, especially if it increases spending without a budget link.
Okay, so a procedural check.
Right. And Democrats argued several OBBBA provisions violated it. They pointed to the extension of the 2017 tax cuts, a proposed 10-year ban on states regulating AI, the Planned Parenthood defunding.
And did the parliamentarian agree?
Well, throughout June 2025, the Senate parliamentarian who makes those rulings did strike down several things. Parts of the tax cut extension, that AI ban, the Planned Parenthood funding block, and the drama around just starting the debate. That procedural vote on June 28th, it was intense.
How so?
Key fiscal conservatives like Ron Johnson, Rand Paul, and even a moderate like Tom Tillis, they initially voted no. Others just withheld their votes. Rick Scott, Mike Lee, Cynthia Lummis, Lisa Murkowski.
So leadership didn't have the votes at first?
Not even close. It took hours of negotiations. Reportedly, Senator Murkowski got some Alaska-specific items added, and the leadership promised the fiscal conservatives a vote on an amendment for even deeper Medicaid cuts.
Ah, concessions to bring them on board.
Exactly. That finally secured their votes to proceed. And then, remember the Democrats' tactic?
The reading of the bill.
Yeah. They made the Senate clerks read the entire 940-page bill aloud. Took almost 16 hours. The specific goal was to publicly highlight those Medicaid cuts.
A stalling tactic, but also a messaging tactic.
For sure. And amidst all that, one of the few amendments that actually passed, and it passed 99-1, removed that proposed ban on state AI laws. Apparently, almost everyone hated that idea.
Yeah, that makes sense. So all this back and forth, the internal fighting, the procedural hurdles, what does it tell us about the Republican Party itself right now?
Well, it really puts those complex internal dynamics on display, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You've got the tension between the dominant populist wing, the more traditional fiscal conservatives, and even some moderates.
Right. Different factions pulling in different directions. Exactly. And while President Trump's influence clearly cemented that more right-wing populist faction, which, sometimes clashes with older Republican ideas like being strictly against any increase in national debt, these negotiations just show the practical reality. You still need to build a broad enough coalition within your own party to get something this huge passed.
Yeah.
And also highlights those institutional checks, like the Byrd Rule, that are specifically designed to limit just how much you can pack into one of these reconciliation bills.
So, okay, after all that legislative maneuvering, looking at the bigger picture, what were some of the main criticisms? What were the anticipated impacts of this massive bill?
Well, the reactions were strong.
Moody's, for instance, one of the big three credit rating agencies, they actually downgraded U.S. debt and specifically cited the push to pass this bill as a reason.
That's significant. A credit downgrade.
Yeah. And warnings came from other places, too. Like NRF, the National Active and Retired Federal Employees Association, they warned about a potential 5% pay cut for federal workers and retirees, arguing it would basically undermine the whole merit-based civil service system.
Concerns about the federal workforce.
Right. And Everett Kelly, head of the AFGE, the main federal employee union, he called it a big retaliation bill, said it would make it way harder for agencies to hire and keep good people.
Strong language. Retaliation bill.
Very. And maybe one of the sharpest critiques came from Joseph Stiglitz, the Nobel Prize-winning economist. He called the whole thing outrageous.
Outrageous. Why?
He argued it just makes inequality and social division worse, that it takes healthcare access away from vulnerable groups, which would make things like declining life expectancy and health gaps even worse than they already are.
So deep concerns about social impact and fairness.
Deep concerns. And it's probably not surprising that the bill was widely, let's say, derided by people in the center and on the left as the big ugly bill, or BUB.
Yeah, BUB. So this really raises a crucial question, I think, for you, the listener. How is implementing a bill this comprehensive actually going to impact different parts of the American population, the economy? Especially given these really strong criticisms about the fiscal side, the debt, and the social implications.
Right. What are the real-world effects going to be?
Exactly. And the fact that they pushed this through, despite all the internal dissent, despite the loud external criticism, it really reinforces the current Republican Party's laser focus on a specific set of priorities, doesn't it? Low taxes, strong borders, cutting government spending, even if it means more debt, or cuts to social programs. It signals, I think, a continued evolution of the party, moving further towards a pretty solid right-wing stance. You saw that in their 2024 platform, too, which got even more nationalistic, more protectionist than before. It just underscores how much the Trump era continues to shape the GOP.
So we've taken a pretty deep dive into this one big, beautiful bill act. We've looked at its ambitious goals, its challenging journey through Congress, and how it reflects the Republican Party's shifting priorities. It's really clear this legislation reaches into almost every corner of American life and the economy.
It really does. And as we think about the immediate impact and the longer-term effects, it kind of leaves us with this provocative thought, doesn't it? In an era where we see these huge, sweeping legislative packages like the OBBBA, how will that delicate balance ultimately play out? The balance between massive tax cuts, huge spending increases in areas like border security, and then significant cuts to the social safety net. How does all that together redefine the government's role in our lives, and how does it shape the economic landscape for the next decade?
It's a deep dive that, well, it's definitely going to continue unfolding.